Good evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Amitha Balachandra. This is a 6:30 p.m. show that I do every single day. Today, we're going to be talking about one story that hasn't got enough attention, and that is the report by the Parliamentary Standing Committee on the DNA Technology Use and Application Regulation Bill 2019. Now, before I get to the report and what are the major concerns, let me give you a bit of a background. In July 2019, the Centre introduced a bill, the DNA Technology Use and Application Regulation Bill 2019, to enable agencies basically to use DNA technology while probing crime cases and also set up a data bank of DNA. On the first week of February, the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Science and Technology, in fact, has recommended that the government address some of the concerns, and they've highlighted these concerns, which we'll talk about over the course of this conversation, that have been raised over this bill, both in the parliament and outside. They've also said that it's an important bill for criminal investigation, and a number of members have spoken about its importance, but have also said that there are many fears regarding this particular bill, which can be misused to target different segments of society based on religion, caste, or political views. So right now, we're going to talk about what this bill is, what are the concerns, and why we should be concerned, if at all. To answer all of these questions, I have Rohin from the Internet Freedom Foundation join us, and he's been very kind enough to give us some time after having a long day. So Rohin, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, if you can first simply break down the bill for us, tell us what the provisions are in the bill, and then we'll take the concerns piece by piece.
Thank you so much for having me, Amitha. No, it's always I think it's an important issue to talk about. So the Law Commission in 2017 had proposed the DNA. It is called the DNA Bill 2017. That was, I think, introduced in 2018. It lapsed, and then last year we had the DNA Bill 2019. So the bill basically is trying to regulate the usage of DNA technologies to identify people. Whether this be, for example, for the purpose of missing persons or for maintaining a database of criminal people who are criminals or in certain cases suspect criminals. So broadly, this bill firstly gives the government the power to sets up regional and national DNA banks. A DNA regulatory board which will regulate and accredit all these various banks and provide certain sort of offenses, okay, who all is authorized to access such information, what happens when such people contravene such provisions. And of course, they specify some sort of protection measures. So, okay, you can't, this ostensibly can't be used to you can't use someone's DNA evidence to incriminate oneself. Consent must always be taken in the case of when extracting any sort of bodily fluids for DNA. Of course, overrides of that, we'll get to that when the concerns happen, but that's sort of the overall bill.
Okay, so what are the general concerns that have been raised? And I want to take this piece by piece. First of all, let's talk about privacy. How do the provisions in the bill violate privacy, if at all?
So if I may sort of focus, if I may just we get to privacy, it's no big concern. But I think the main concern is fundamentally with DNA technology. DNA technology has its benefits, but DNA technology is also shown to be, it's not infallible. In fact, the courts have also said, I think the High Court of Madhya Pradesh said that you cannot, just by using DNA to establish some sort of presence at a crime scene does not indicate causal evidence of guilt. So DNA technology in and of itself has these fundamental issues, and it's not the science itself. It's about a more humble use of such technologies. Now we get to privacy. Well, there are a host of concerns. Firstly, this DNA bill is being enacted in the absence of a robust data protection legislation, the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019. But that really, and that bill, while imperfect, is a step up in terms of privacy standards that currently exist. So there are certain rights that citizens actually, not just users, citizens are afforded, and certain sort of standards that are prescribed that are higher than right now. Right now, it's pretty much unregulated or largely unregulated, and private companies can do what they want. But in the absence of something like this, given that there is, I mean, space for private sector usage of DNA data, it's very concerning, because then without those very basic level safeguards, they have a power to do a lot of sort of nefarious things, really. The other issues, for example, very basic stuff. No data retention timelines have been mentioned. This very sort of standard stuff across from legislation across the world. For example, I believe the Indian Repeated Convicts Act or Habitual Offenders Act also specifies that data will only be collected, personal data, after a couple of years, and that also will be kept for a certain amount of time. Whereas this bill just gives willy-nilly sort of, okay, there's no right. So that is another big issue. And there's of course the fact that in India, and this is I mean, I'm sure you know this. The committee itself faced two dissent notes, one from Asaduddin Owaisi of the All India MIM, Binoy Biswal, the CPI, and both of them indicated these concerns that, look, given the reality of the Indian justice system, we have it has a lot of biases, right? And so you have marginalized communities and religious minorities who are disproportionately incarcerated, especially the level. Now, this policy act, the bill actually, and the report, because the report doesn't do much about it, it actually allows it says, okay, you can actually harvest the DNA data of even under trials. Now, this obviously there's a very obvious jump here from just simple data collection to surveillance and profiling and racial targeting. So I think that is another sort of set of privacy concerns important.
No, right. So you mentioned a couple of privacy concerns, surveillance, data profiling. You also mentioned that there's no data retention timelines that have been mentioned. You also spoke about how minorities could be targeted. I also want to talk about the fact that there's a data bank that will be created. If you can help us understand how this can be misused. What happens when you give that kind of power to the government?
Certainly. So what happened in 2018, we had a pretty big judgment on privacy, right? The Puttaswamy judgment of the Supreme Court, which enshrined the right to privacy as fundamental. But it allowed certain infringements upon that, but it laid down standards, which are called the proportionality standards. I won't get into those. But there are certain standards that have to be met when any sort of harms are committed that affect the right to privacy. Now, given that this bill was pre-Puttaswamy, what happened with the Aadhaar Act after Puttaswamy was that the entire act, that entire piece of legislation went through a Puttaswamy review to see, okay, for each of its clauses, is this Puttaswamy compliant? Does this meet the burden of this proportionality? And that has been lacking from the review process of the DNA bill so far. Issue there is with the DNA bank. So the bill originally proposed a national and a regional DNA. The committee said, okay, just have a national bank. But the issue there is this: you have this tremendous collection of DNA data, which, forget the infallibilities, forget the sort of other privacy concerns. The fact is, having such a collection of data, even for someone like under trials or just even suspects, is grossly abhorrent, right? I mean, the entire point, rule of law would lead one to presume innocent until proven guilty. To then have a database that willy-nilly corrects such data, even under trials, is of course going to lead to significant invasion of privacy. And this, when you put it in context of targeting of minorities or marginalized groups, it is those groups who will be affected by this more. So I think that is how you have this very dissonant DNA bank setting at the center of this technology apparatus.
Let's also talk about the infrastructure. Is infrastructure also going to be a challenge?
Actually, it is going to be a tremendous challenge, because the committee itself accepts India doesn't have that level of technology. Not only does not have that level of technology, our courts are not ready, as acknowledged by the Supreme Court, I believe, or the High Court, I believe, High Court of Delhi, I believe, that our criminal justice system has not had the ability to deal with DNA evidence. So that will require a huge amount of capacity building. And I think, if I may segue a little, that reflects in the fiscal cost. Memorandum of the bill, where they gave a sort of estimate of, okay, what is going to be the costs involved. It says about 20 crore rupees. Now, in a pandemic ravaged economy, when we're already, I mean, in a sense, they are they're well hidden, but there are budget cuts to take money further away and spend it on something which, firstly, even if, I mean, it's still not clear whether it would constitute a gross privacy, but also something which is not really needed at this point, right? Where you have enough people from the legal system saying that, okay, this needs further testing. We're not saying chuck it immediately right now, but this needs further testing, this needs further capacity building. And so to bring this in at this point is also is a fiscal mistake, given because 20 crore, as the committee, as the dissent notes also acknowledged, is probably underestimate.
So considering now the committee has sent this report and asked the government to address these fears, what are the recommendations then from the committee?
So the committee actually has, so from the committee side, the committee has a host of recommendations. Some of them, like I said, involve more minor ones, such as, okay, instead of national and regional DNA banks, you have only DNA banks. Some of them involve, okay, I believe, so the committee has recommended, okay, that the government review the concept of crime scene index, where you sort of map out all sort of data in a particular crime scene. So there's a host of issues that proposed changes. I'm not going to go through the list of them because that would take too long, but they are there. But I think a lot of the key issues, in my opinion, what the committee has done is that they've said, okay, this is an issue, we acknowledge it, but we're keeping it for now. Like they've placed the burden on the government to go on the floor of Parliament and assuage these fears, which again is incredulous. I mean, the committee was meant to make these suggestions. You can suggest it. It's a government just reject these changes. But if it feels so, if it acknowledges that these concerns exist, surely they should have actually recommended what should take the place and not place the burden on the government and given them further discretion to do as they want.
And so what happens from now, and how does the Internet Freedom Foundation plan to pursue this as well?
So what happens now is, of course, the report's on the floor of the table. The government will take its time, review it, and then come back to us with a new version of the DNA bill. We at IFF, actually, we do plan to do more outreach. So we've reached out to the two members who've filed those dissent notes, and in the coming weeks, we do plan to write to the standing committee again, as well as to the ministry, saying that, okay, please, committee has acknowledged all these concerns. Surely there's time for more public review, more consultation, and at the very least, this bill has to go through one round of again Puttaswamy compliance sort of reviewing to ensure that it meets very basic standards.
No, right. So so for people who are watching right now, who want to understand this a little better, take a look at the Internet Freedom Foundation's website. We'll put up a link in the description as well. But this is where it stands. The committee has tabled its report, and it will perhaps be reviewed, and the Internet Freedom Foundation will also pursue this, they say. We'll put up a link in the description. But thank you so much for watching.